Right. Oh, it should be live. Right, I need to check some audio levels as per usual. Need to make sure that you guys can hear me clearly, and that the nice Hobbit sound is at a good volume. So if anyone can confirm that they can actually hear me and that all the sound volumes are fine, then that'd be helpful. No? Is anyone just in the chat on YouTube, if you confirm that you actually can hear me, that's really helpful. Cool. There we go. All right. Well, welcome everyone to the New Year's stream. 2022. Happy New Year, everyone. Thanks for all the support in the year. So yeah, I think at the moment I'm actually, Hermitix is actually about 4 people off 10k subs. So hopefully this stream might raise the volume a little. There you go. Hopefully, if thanks for the donation. Hopefully, if this stream goes well, then we're at 10k subs. I'd have thought we will be. So, yeah, I've got a load of questions. I might as well get going. I've got a load of questions from Discord, Patron, and loads of other places to go through. And then if anyone obviously asks questions, then they're more than welcome to. So, the first question's a pretty big one. Is have followed you since the first episode? Thank you, whoever this is. Would love to know, if appropriate, your reasons for moving towards Catholicism, if this hasn't been touched on already. I touched on it a little bit when I first announced it in the last Q&A in October. And ultimately, and I mean, she'll come up again in a bit because I think there's a question about her. Which is Edith Stein's reply to this when people asked her, Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, when she was asked, why did you become Catholic? Why did you head over to Catholicism? She would say, secretum meum mihi, which means this secret belongs to me. And she didn't mean like she was keeping it secretive, but as in it's an internal secret and she wouldn't be able to explain it, even if she wanted to, right? So that is probably the cornerstone, because ultimately, right, a lot of people, when they ask about why did you go, when they generally ask people about conversion stories, be it Catholicism, Islam, whatever, a lot of people begin from practical considerations. So they're saying, like, for instance, a lot of people know that I'm somewhat traditional. It's like, did you move over to Catholicism for traditional values or something like that? It's like, you can have traditional values without, having to be a Catholic and having to subscribe to all of that. And I think ultimately the basis for any conversion, obviously, is foremost and first and foremost is going to be faith, and that isn't something that is ever going to be able to be explained. Like you can't really ever explain or articulate in words why you suddenly believe in God when you once didn't, right? But I mean, perhaps if that question had been more specific, like why this instead of that, or why this instead of other things, maybe. But reasons for moving towards it, found God. There you go, found Christ. That's as far as I can really go. Someone just said we just hit 10k. So wow, that's pretty astounding, really. Thanks everyone for 10,000. There's a comment from the first ever Dmitry Orlov interview where the guy says, someone comments, how in the world has this podcast only got 700 subscribers? And that was like in 2018. So I always like that comment. I always look back at it to try keep base. But 10K is amazing. Thanks, guys. I mean, with Twitter and other little platforms, I mean, that's bordering on like 20K total now. So that's really, really great. So thanks for all the support. Yeah, I'll show you. There's a question about my books in a bit, so I might enlarge the camera for that. So the next question was, which books on the church fathers, church history, and theology have you read? I mean, right. Church history, I began a huge book called Christianity: The First 3,000 Years by, I don't know how to pronounce this, like Diane Maid McCulloch. I really didn't like it. I got about 250 pages in and realized that, like, you know, and this is already the Catholic in me sort of trying to say this, but it was the reading was so Protestant that I just really couldn't merge with it. So I've purchased books. There's like a 6-volume history by a Catholic author, which will be correct. But church fathers, I mean, I've read the Desert Fathers. I've got the early Christian writings to read. Really, I mean, it's easier for me to look. So, yeah, I mean, basically the entirety of C.S. Lewis's Christian works, I mean, they're all fantastic. I'm sort of indebted for Lewis for my arrival in the faith in general. You know, I've said before, my literary arrival into Christianity was very eclectic. So there was Thomas Merton on one hand, who's, you know, very spiritual, mystical Catholic, with a 7-story mountain in his notebooks. And then on the other hand, there was Seraphim Rose, the author of a well-known Orthodox who wrote Orthodoxy and Religion in the Future, and Nihilism. And Nihilism was like a key entry text into Christianity. I mean, if one of the reasons you might be looking at Christianity is this as this saving thing, which it is, and you're disillusioned with the modern world, and you're trying to find a conversation between these two, I mean, read Seraphim Rose's Nihilism. It hits every nail on all their heads, so to speak. Bishop Barron's Catholicism was like my first real Catholic text. I've been reading a lot of Carmelite stuff at the moment, so Stein, John of the Cross. Just finished actually just before coming on here. Saint Therese of Lisieux, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Her Story of the Soul, which is very sweet. I didn't connect with it too well. I think there's probably a bit of a gap. It's very female. Perhaps I'm wrong in that. Perhaps in time I'll find more in it. Then there was also Girard. Girard was very big. There was also Sheed's Theology for Beginners, which is really great. And I've got a ton to read. I mean, really, for theology and for all this stuff at the moment, my primary focus is on the Catechism of the Catholic Church, as you can imagine, which is the, you know, scripture and tradition, and that covers tradition in a very big sense in terms of the RCIA process into the church. So you spend a lot of time with that. I'm sure other books will come up. So, next question is a really long one. My main philosophical sympathies are with the classical medieval tradition as synthesized by Aquinas. But like you, I'm also drawn to some of the continental thinkers, Heidegger and some of the German idealists especially. Foucault to some extent as well. That being said, later 20th century continental thought seems to have descended into a self-referential morass of meaningless drivel. What do you make of thinkers like Deleuze and the whole body without organs type of discourse? Do you think there's anything of substance underneath the impenetrable jargon, or is it just intentional obscurity that can mean whatever inanities midwits in the university system decide to read into it? Even if there is anything worthwhile underneath, is it even worth the effort to get to it, or has it been said in a better, clearer way by others? Well, the Christian in me immediately wants to say there's nothing new under the sun, and actually the more philosophy you read and the more history you read, you find that a lot of what new original philosophy is doing is a nuanced, unique way of retelling a story which has been told throughout history in different contexts and different times. And I think in this term, philosophy for me in a certain sense is almost like René Guénon's appreciation of tradition, in the sense that the root of tradition and the species of tradition is always the same, but every cycle, of course, the flower has to grow within the context of the soil and the sun and the atmosphere, and etc., etc., right? So the tradition's always the same, but the flowers and the leaves of that year are going to be different. So with that, philosophy for me is like that. So in terms of that idea of have these things been said clearer in better ways? Often the case is with philosophy is to find your thinker, to find that person who, you know, makes it click for you and tells the story in the way which works for you. Some people might not agree with that reading of philosophy, fair enough. But there's a lot of questions in this. So what do I make of like the Deleuze body without organs discourse? I still really love capitalism and schizophrenia, and I spoke to someone today, Ashley Woodward, about his book on Lyotard, nihilism, and information, and that stuff's so exciting, it really is. But you can get really burnt out on it, as you say. There is a ton of jargon, and probably, well, let's say, this all begins, perhaps not as full on, but begins sort of post-Nietzsche. You begin to see this stuff, you begin to see this. And the way I would really clarify it, because I've thought about this question a lot, is that what begins to happen is the sort of, if there's two trails, which is the amount of ideas being produced and the amount of connections they're actually making to the world and how they can actually be used, they get out of sync. So it used to be that there would be a very practical philosophy which didn't use many ideas and wanted to change the world with like one idea, like utilitarianism, for instance, like the greatest good. And then that's sort of become unbalanced in the fact that, like, you look at a text like Anti-Oedipus or 1,000 Plateaus, and there's a thousand ideas in there, and they're all super, super interesting and exciting and radical and like explosive. But you also think at the same time, I don't really know how to use these. And the trajectory of philosophy from sort of Nietzsche onwards has been more and more and more and more ideas, but less utilization. And of course, I don't want to like subsume everything into like, well, how do you use that practically? But I do have a sort of an emphasis on that in my own life, which is sort of why I quite like Stein as well. Whether or not there's any truth to the fact it's something for the university system to read into, it's very difficult to say, because the university system, quotation marks, I don't know exactly what that is. I mean, I say the academy a lot, and everyone, like modernity or like all these other things, a lot of people agree with whatever we mean when we say the academy. But it's difficult. I mean, my contention, my problem with these sort of ideas would be, I think it's super fun. It's completely fine and obviously fine for philosophy to do that, to go, just to be explosive and to have 1,000, 1,000,000 ideas and, to be radical. But the point when it's trying to make out as if it's doing something more, or, that's when it becomes a bit more, or they want to use these very free floating terms in a way which alters realities, which could be quite harmful in a way. Well, then you've got a problem and it needs to be looked into. But there you go. There's not much of an answer there, because the university system, ironically, of course, relies on the deconstruction which it seeks to teach, but if it was taught properly, would actually undermine the university system itself. So they're always in this double bind of how far can they actually go with teaching postmodernism or deconstruction, because ultimately to practically teach that to its terminal point is to undermine the very foundations which give them a paycheck. So, it's unfortunate. But not everyone's like that. Not everyone's deconstructionist. And I do, from what I've seen and all the academics I've spoken to, philosophy courses actually seem to be becoming more and more diverse. We are slowly moving away actually from the Marx Freud superhighway, the Levinas Heidegger emphasis in the continental tradition. Of course, certain thinkers are going to disagree with the idea of them being called philosophy courses at all, because they don't include Eastern philosophy. But that's a big question in itself. But that's my answer for that one, I think, for now. Someone asks, will you ever speak to Nick Land again? So I atted him on Twitter a while ago when I finished the third philosophy of Bitcoin talk, and I was originally going to do a fourth, but actually I found I'd be repeating myself too much, and I said, do you want to come on Hermitix again and talk about it? And he said he'll come on when he's finished. So I don't know. Nick, if you're watching, which you probably aren't, then please come on Hermitix again. It would be great to talk to you again. I do have a file on my computer when we tried to record something about horror, but the internet wasn't very good on the day, and all I've got is a recording of Nick saying the words "I like Yule," as in Yuletide season, and that's all that is discernible from that. I'm not releasing that. Yeah. A lot of people have been asking this next one a lot lately. How many hours a day do I typically spend reading? It does vary, but on average, 4 or 5. So I spend, but a lot of people see the amount of books that I get through, or the amount of books that I've read, or the amount of reading I do, and they're like, how? And I sort of say to them, that's my job, right? Like, if you think about your job, and you had to read for a living, then you would also get that amount of reading done. That's just how it is, and it isn't always enjoyable, to be honest. But it is split. I actually follow Schopenhauer. You know, really good thing to do if you're looking how to structure your day is basically look to the thinkers you quite admire and see how they did it. And I look to Schopenhauer, who started his day with I don't start my day with a coffee and a bath, but he started about 7, and he made sure to do the sort of strenuous, heavy philosophical reading. Like, for instance, if I'm reading something like, I've got Simon Don's Individuation in Lights of Notion and Form and Information to read, and I've also got Facing Gaia by Bruno Latour to read, and these are quite heavy, genuinely philosophical texts. These kind of things I'll read in the early hours of the day, because that's the best time. Usually your brain or you is too intellectually tired by about 5 p.m. And I can see the questions in the chat, so I'll get to them. And you don't want to, so I do about two hours then, and then I might do another hour throughout the day, and then I usually do possibly some podcast reading in bed if it's a bit lighter. So, for instance, I recently had a biography of Rudolf Steiner to read, which was fairly light, and it was quite an enjoyable read, so I read that. But if not, that's when I'll do my personal reading, which is generally floats between 3 topics, which is usually have a Gurdjieff book to read. At the moment, it's Gurdjieff, Master in Life by Czesław Cikonowicz, Polish name. And then I'll have like a spiritual book as well. And then I usually try read a part of the Catechism every day at the moment as well. As for scripture, I've quite relaxed on that at the moment, because scripture's so spiritually dense in obviously a positive way, that to say like, oh, I've read the Bible, you've never read the Bible, really, have you? You've never finished it. You've never, oh, I've finally got to the last page, I'm done with the Bible now, like, oh, I get it. For instance, you could spend a lifetime simply studying the Gospel of John, or the Gospel of Matthew, and there are people who've written literally, like, I think it's Adrian von Speer who's written 4 volumes on John. Yeah. So, but that's how much time I spend reading. And the weekends I spend, Sundays I usually mark out some time to spend reading Christian stuff and RCIA stuff for the process to enter the church. And weekends I'll spend a lot more time as well. I'll cover a few things in the chat before they move on too far. So someone says, thanks for the donation declaration. Where does sovereignty lie? Personally, for me, sovereignty, I mean, if you're talking a personal, so I do sort of somewhat believe in the idea of the sovereign individual. So I would say a lot of sovereignty is with the self, in that sort of Jungerian view of, what you find in Homageville of this person who's detached. I do think there is still a place for personal or individual sovereignty in this world. And that can be, you can it sounds ironic, but I think you can still be a sovereign individual, even if there's a boot trampling on you. It's whether or not your internal life is still targeted towards the principles which you've attempted to uphold as long as you can. As long as you don't bow down and hand in the towel internally, lower the drawbridge of your interior castle, then I think the sovereign individual is there. What have we got on here? Someone says, first time seeing me. There's a lot of video stuff with me now there. What do I think of Advaita Neo Advaita? I don't think I'm pronouncing that. I don't know anything about it, unfortunately, so I'm sorry about that. Someone says, without love, nothing can be sanctified. I mean, yeah, I'm in complete agreement, because Edith Stein, one of the probably her most famous quote is that they're basically, to paraphrase, there can't be truth without love, and there can't be love without truth. And we see this really in the tales of the Pharisees, of this idea of not doing anything, even if it would be the good thing to do, because there's a certain truth which is to be upheld, right? That things aren't enacted on the Sabbath, that the work that isn't taking place on the Sabbath. And so the Pharisees abide by truth with this lower T truth. They abide by it to the letter. It's like and almost pull the shutters down to push away all the good that could possibly happen. And in doing so, they're basically taking truth without the good. And of course, the good does happen there. And the Pharisees are an exact example of this. That you have to, there always has to be love, and that has to come first with the same dynamic. You can't have the one without the other. Otherwise, you're entering into either sort of possibly totalitarian relationship with truth, where, I can't do that even though I know it's the right thing to do, but also doing the right thing even though you may have some knowledge in terms of tradition. Yeah. What do I think of the metaphysics of Eros? I don't know if that's a text. I mean, if you're talking sort of about Ludwig Klager's cosmogonic Eros, I thought it was an extremely exciting text. Of course, I sold it for the reason that I can't read. It's a bit dubious. Someone says sovereignty lies with God. That's sort of obvious, but I was thinking more of sovereignty in a specific sense. But yeah. The metaphysics of Eros, I mean, I had obviously, Klager's is fantastic, but now Klager's is somewhat a problematic thinker for me now, because I do quite adore his work. It's extremely unique, extremely I love philosophers who actually aren't afraid to go in with really great prose, and Klager's is a fantastic writer. Supposedly, from what I've heard from Paul Bishop, actually absolutely horrible to translate, one of real difficulty, plays around with a lot of different forms of German, I believe. But yeah, he's such a great writer. So, but in terms of Eros, I don't know. I'm on the 21st, I'm recording an episode on Eros and Magic in the Renaissance by Juan Picculiano, who many of you know, with Maurizio. And so that would be interesting. There'll be more about Eros there. So James Mullen says, what's the most exhausting text I've ever read? I can only do Heidegger for a few hours in one sitting. Most exhausting text I've ever read. I'm currently, to be fair, it's not even the primary. Let me look at my shelves. Difference and Repetition by Deleuze was very difficult. That was exhausting, most definitely. Some of Heidegger was definitely exhausting. I got about a quarter of a way through Being and Nothingness before I realised I wasn't getting too much out of it. I don't want to say Kant was exhausting, because actually, once Kant clicks, you don't really get exhausted, but you just have a lot to really process and work with, and Kant's very straightforward. I also don't think Kant's a bad writer. So yeah. But what I was going to... there is a book by Hubert Dreyfus and Paul Rabineau on Michel Foucault to do with hermeneutics, which is, I found very dry, very exhausting. Kant's logic actually was quite exhausting. But the one I'm going to mention is all the times that I've come across Husserl. And I'm reading a secondary book on Husserl in preparation for some talks that I want to give on Edith Stein's philosophy. And Husserl is just not impenetrable, but a real line-by-liner. Just slow going. Even in this second book by Dermot Moran. So that's probably the most exhausting that I'd go with. What's my opinion of Land's/Spinoza's philosophy? I don't think this is the problem. I want to ask, are Land and Spinoza alike? I don't know. I don't know Spinoza, or are you just saying two separate ones? Right, you've asked a second question, which is easy for me to answer. That are you Christian? Yes, specifically Catholic catechumene. Come Easter, hopefully, a Catholic. What's my opinion on Land and Spinoza's philosophy? Well, obviously, I've written a book on Land's philosophy, so I still adore Land's philosophy and always will. I think it's just so much fun. Is how I'd describe it. It's just so much fun, and it really drew me into philosophy. It was an absolute flame that never went out and never will, and I'd like to return at some point, maybe to do some talks on Fang Noumena, but I always tried quite hard to not constrain Land's philosophy, because it's just something you sit down with at 3 a.m. With a fever, and you just go into it, and it's absolute, someone famously said that Emil Cioran was the last Nietzschean, and Heidegger said that actually Jünger was the last Nietzschean. But in that vein of that real radicality and accelerative push to see how we can blister philosophy at the edges, Land is definitely there, or was there. In those early books. Someone says, "Am I that one guy who asks all the questions in my RCIA class?" Oh, undoubtedly, of course. But for one reason, because I won't name him, but the priest, my priest has such a depth of experience that asking him questions is to have that sort of wisdom, like genuine wisdom in front of me, is far, far greater than being told to go read a text, RCIA for beginners or Catholicism for beginners, to actually be able to sort of delve into this lifetime of faith and belief is, and I want to savor that opportunity while I have it, while at the moment it's mandatory for me to go to these classes every however long, so I'm going to take him up while that's an opportunity for me. Who are the thinkers that you think are impressive and influential, yet when together they would not make any actually good and productive conversations, assuming they understand each other? I enjoy the Hermitix question, but actually a lot of philosophers really do fall into the same camp of probably wanting to be left alone, or just wanting to stick to their own. So, a lot of philosophers are impressive, but you have a few problems. One is that actually a lot of philosophers are writers. So I've had a few people turn down interviews for the mere fact they say, I'm a writer, I can't talk about these things. They might have tried, and they just it's not something they can do. And I think the same is probably true for a lot of philosophers, that to have a conversation with them wouldn't be the same as allowing them to sit down and think about writing about something, for instance. It's great when they can, a lot of them can, but I think you put a lot of philosophers in a room together, what would happen is either a sort of meltdown where everyone just goes quiet, or you'd be surprised that they just talk about regular day things, because maybe they'd be smart enough to think, something's going on, so they wouldn't want to. As for productive conversations, I don't know how productive any conversation would be between philosophers, because I think the most productive ones would be between philosophers who have absolutely glaring differences. Those are generally the most productive conversations, because they know that they're at such an impasse that they're happy to just let the guard down and just talk, because the other might not, maybe not Hegel and Schopenhauer. I mean, that would just be a fight, and Schopenhauer would win. But maybe not them. But for instance, if you take two people who agree on 95% of their work, but they have that 5% difference, they're far more likely to just have a very unproductive, debate where it turns into ad hominem. So yeah, I don't. There's only so many. Whether or not any of these Hermitix rooms would be productive, who can tell? Turn down the music volume. There you go. How do you reconcile the Catholic Church's prohibitions on magic and certain spiritual practices with Hermeticism or personal spiritual magic practice? There's a question coming up about this. It's actually next. So someone did ask, do you find it difficult to reconcile the fourth way in Christianity, or does it come naturally? So right, I'll sort of start with yours and then move into what the fourth way is. So reconciling the prohibitions and personal spiritual magic practice. as far as I'm concerned, with the experience that I've have of what one might consider magical practice or whatever, most of that isn't good for you, and it's prohibited for a good reason. Secondly, and I don't want to conflate the two in saying that they're the same thing, because they're not. But when people sort of think that you're suddenly becoming confined by some sort of doctrine or dogma, which you are in the Catholic Church, but there's not going to be any outlets for mysticism or spirituality, then that's completely untrue. And if you are of that that sort of calling, of a mystical calling, there's obviously avenues for that in denominations, so you can certainly find that. But of course, I don't want to say the word practice, because it isn't a practice really. I do follow the guidance of Gurdjieff and the Fourth Way, but that's more psychology than it is practice. There's no ritual, there's no sigils, there's no ceremonious magic or anything like that with that. There is obviously for instance, just to take one example, because I was thinking about this question a lot, to take one example, Gurdjieff, for instance, didn't believe that human beings have souls. He believed that humans had to earn their soul, and if they died, obviously then the question would be, well, what happens if a human without a soul dies? They just die like in the atheist fashion. They just become worm food. Or Gurdjieff would say, you die like a dog, right? Die like a dirty dog. Are you going to die like a dog, or are you going to earn your soul? And I like the idea of earning the soul. I do like that idea. But the thing is, for me to say, well, no, I just don't agree with Gurdjieff on that on that matter, that no, everyone does have a soul, doesn't tamper with the practice of the Fourth Way, which is genuinely helpful for life, to do with self-observation and self-remembering and these practices. And they're not, I don't see them as nefarious, and there's many Catholic lines within the Fourth Way. So for instance, Uspensky was obviously sort of Gurdjieff's right-hand man for a long time, who then wrote In Search of the Miraculous and was doing his own thing. Supposedly he sort of drifted towards a more Catholic outlook in his later days. This may have come from his student Rodney Collin, who was definitely trying to combine the two and found them completely compatible. And J.G. Bennett, one of the more famous Gurdjieffian pupils, he converted to Catholicism in his later years. Catherine Hulme, after Gurdjieff passed away, also converted to Catholicism. There's a lot of them, and I think really it is compatible. And really, what Gurdjieff is for me, I'll only speak for myself, but I think what Gurdjieff really had managed to do is synthesize a mass of fragmented and helpful and beneficial mystical currents and traditions which could really help someone develop, and put them into a unified system which still made sense but actually didn't hone people in and didn't capture them. And that's all it is. It's very helpful. And of course you can find these things elsewhere, but they're so spread out that they'd be difficult to find all the different things that he's commenting on. So here we go. Have I done a podcast on the metaphysics of money, finance, economics? If not, would you consider doing one in the near future? So I've done a podcast with Ole Bjerg, which is OLE space BJERG, on the ontology of capitalism, which might interest you. And I've also done 3 talks on Nick Land's philosophy of Bitcoin. And yeah, those are the ones I've done, right? So, but what I really want to do is just continue, and I've also done talks on Karl Menger's Economics, the book which really started off the Austrian school, because the Austrian school of economics really, really interests me, and I do want to continue doing them. And I've got Jürgen von Baumgart's Capital and Interest to begin and do lectures on. So yeah, so there'll be more of that stuff, but I've got so many threads of things I want to tackle that it's tough. Aren't you concerned about working with someone asks, aren't I concerned about working with a crypto-related project in the times when the crypto industry has such dreadful environmental impact? Well, I do have an answer for this, actually, which people have yet to really address. Ultimately, we live in a state where everything has to have a payoff. Everything has to have its that, you know, for instance, if I want a TV, then I get a TV and that's great. But ultimately that does have to have this resource and economic payoff, and you know that means some destruction somewhere. Everything in life, there's no such thing as a free lunch, as Robert Heinlein would say, right? There is no such thing as a free lunch. Like, everything has that thing. So the question isn't, I don't think, and really I took this from a talk with a guy called Bill Ottman, who's the CEO of Minds.com. And I thought it was a great way to think about it. He said, really, the question isn't to think about, well, okay, because you see all these articles, Bitcoin and blah, 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 Bitcoin crypto is having a dreadful environmental impact. The question really should be is the environmental impact that Bitcoin is having worth worth what it gives us? And I would put that into perspective in terms of saying that I personally believe, and I imagine that there's a deep irony and contradiction in the fact that the same people who would talk about, you know, the modern brilliance of banking and central banking are the same people who would in the same breath also talk about the brilliance of modern automation and AI, and yet they've never considered to branch the two. And I think that's simply because I don't really know why, right? Of all the things in the world, banking is the first thing that could easily be automated, especially all the tellers and banks. So one could say, yeah, okay, Bitcoin has this dreadful environmental impact, but what Bitcoin is trying to replace is the centralized banking system, which is dreadful, which steals your money, which and has a 10-to-1 ratio of creating debt, right? What Bitcoin seeks to replace is the centralized banking system, which equally has a ginormous, catastrophic environmental impact. It has banks everywhere, physical banks which literally aren't needed anymore, with people driving to and fro and all this kind of stuff which aren't needed anymore. That whole thing could be digitalized, and yet they refuse to do it. And Bitcoin, on the other hand, which is seeking to solve this problem of the energy problem that it's creating, which and actually is trying to genuinely seek it, if it was to replace the system of centralized banking, would have a far less detrimental effect on the environment than the entire centralized banking system. So once again, it's that question of, okay, well, these things are here now. What's going to be the payoff, right? So that's my answer. Who are the most important sophists? Not the ones Plato was arguing with, but the derogatory sense. Don't know. I don't know. I actually don't know. Do you know Traden Lunot Telosbound in his book Apathesis? No, I don't, unfortunately. Where can I find the podcast you did on Julius Evola? If you jump into the Discord, which there'll be links somewhere, or someone can put one in here, there is a link floating around for that episode. Someone says, any luck on getting hold of a Virilio scholar? No. I've emailed 3 or 4 people. Some haven't, all but one didn't reply, and one just said that, once again, that same thing, that they'd written books for the precise reason that they wanted it in writing and not speaking. So, you know, and that's completely understandable. And it's just so frustrating trying to find for scholars or thinkers who want to talk about these people, because I know they exist, right? They have to exist, otherwise there wouldn't be discussion of these thinkers at all. So they're out there, I just can't find them, and that's a very frustrating thing, because I want to make this content accessible for people. The big question from Nihilism is Dead, who also donated, so thanks very much. Why Catholicism instead of Eastern Orthodoxy? Once again, faith is faith, and I have just an intuitive thing that Catholicism is right. One thing I would say is that what I've seen of the Orthodox, and I'm really, really reluctant to put them all in one boat here, I really am, but I'm going to have to do it, is that there's a tendency, it seems, for them to be very prickly around matters of theology, to the point of being very declarative in saying, you're wrong, you're getting it wrong, instead of having that initial openness and then discussing it. And so it seemed to me that the Orthodox focus was first on theology and then on Christ. And I know that's a ridiculous thing to say, but that is the general attitude that I've come across. And I wish no ill to anyone of the Orthodox faith. I think it's absolutely beautiful. I think their aesthetics are beautiful, and music's beautiful. And, you know, Seraphim Rose was one of the guides into the faith for me. But Catholicism just seems right for me. And also, of course, with Eastern Orthodoxy, for me, there's always going to be that cultural divide. And for me, it was almost like I don't want to submit to Catholicism because it's almost like submitting to the Western father, for instance, right? You're like, oh, I don't want... You still have that sort of radical energy where you don't want to give in and say, all right, you were right all along. And so you could do that thing of finding the Eastern alternative, which is very mystical and allows you to sink into a culture which isn't your own. But Catholicism allows me basically to find a great aesthetic beauty in my own culture. So that's what I'd say. Someone said, what do I think of Charles Taylor? You might have to remind me who Charles Taylor is. I know of the name, but there you go. Someone said, I really enjoyed your early chat with Nick Lamb. Would you consider doing a follow-up? Yeah, I mean, if Nick's up for chatting, then I'm always up for chatting, but it's very hard to get him on. I mean, he has a life, he has a family, right? So it's very difficult. Do I have any interest in Pseudo-Dionysius' work? I've heard the name, yet to get round to it. What do I think of Judaism? It's such a huge question. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that because it's just such a massive question. Obviously I would caveat that with my reluctance to answer that doesn't mean I have a problem with it. It's only that it's so all encompassing that I wouldn't know where to start. And I don't know enough about it really to comment in any way. What do I think of apotheosis? I think I'm getting that right in the sense that that's the Eastern Orthodox. Apotheosis is the Eastern Orthodox thing of spiritual development. Someone might have to comment and correct me on that. When will I study Hebrew, ancient or modern? I have to study Latin first, of course. So have I looked into Valentin Tomberg? Didn't Valentin Tomberg supposedly write Meditations on the Tarot? And that's supposedly a Catholic book as well. Someone said, what's my favourite L. Ron Hubbard book? I've never read any of L. Ron Hubbard's work, but I have, however, finished a couple of weeks ago, Going Clear, which was turned into a big documentary, and it's a fantastic read on Scientology, and it's the one thing I've always been reluctant to comment on the podcast, because I know they have eyes everywhere, right? But yeah, no, it was a great read, Going Clear. I'd recommend it to anyone. It's a real page turner, very fun, and sheds light on it, but ultimately, like, I'm also still always, in a way, I have a sympathetic ear for people who, because the word cult is easily applied and very, very difficult to remove from things. And of course it's obvious, and I'm sort of talking from a Gurdjieffian stance. I've recently also been reading Gurdjieff in the Public Eye, which is a collection of the newspaper articles about Gurdjieff's time on Earth, you could say. And there's not many in Constantinople in the early 1900s, but then when he moves to the Priory in France, you have this group of philosophers and mystics in the forest of Fontainebleau at the Priory. Obviously, all in the Daily Mail in like 1920 something, there's this forest cult led by Armenian mystic, right? And it's very easy to do that to someone. So I'm not saying either way about Scientology. I'm just saying that that sort of thinking where you go, right, it's a cult, ridicule every single aspect of it and deny any good that ever came of it. I think that in itself is dangerous, because then people who might have found some good from something which may at some point have been called a cult willy-nilly, it can be quite a nefarious way to think about things. But Going Clear is still a great read. And it also made me rewatch The Master by director Paul Thomas Anderson, one of my favourite films, and it's just great. Read Going Clear and then go watch The Master, and it's really fantastic. Does Catholicism have similar concepts to Prelest? I couldn't tell you. My reluctance to comment on these very specific religious questions is that I just don't know enough at the moment. Right, I'm learning, and Pete, I wrote about this in that 3 parts I wrote about my conversion process. Is that the irony is I went to a Church of England school, Protestant school, which had this very, very minor focus on religious upbringing, right? you'd sing a couple of hymns in assembly, and then you'd say the Our Father, and but you never got told what Our Father means. You never got told what the hymns mean. You never got actually taught anything, and that led me away from to really, in a sentence, my story and my own story in terms of the prodigal son is that I was taught very unconsciously and very subtly, though none of this was intentional, but I was taught because of a very relaxed attitude and a sort of throwing in Christian bits here and there as didactic lessons. I was taught Christianity was something which it completely wasn't. So I went through my teens and into my early 20s basically with this mindset that Christianity basically literally was something that it completely wasn't, and I was badly taught it, and it did a lot of damage. And then I think reading certain things, I mean, if you wanted a book where if you'd say, right, what was the first ever, because Edith Stein, she suddenly sees Teresa of Avila's biography on the shelf, and she reads that, and the next day she goes out and gets a missal and a catechism. And mine wasn't that drastic, but I would say that book was Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. That was the first one and if you were to ask, well, why did I read that? Because I'd seen the way the world was going, and I'd seen what Christianity supposedly said it had to offer from various people online. So I thought, well, I'll start somewhere, and that was the beginning, and that was years ago now. What are my favourite podcast guests, if any, on the philosophy of science related topics? Well, I've done a lot of really great podcasts on this. One thing, which is, you talk to any podcast host, I don't get much time at all to listen to podcasts, unfortunately. But I did a good episode on Bachelard. I did a good episode with Helen Metzger, with Christina Camiso. I've also done a lot on Michel Serres, who's philosophy of science. And slowly doing more and more Latour. And I've got an episode coming up with a guy called Sean Kelly on a book he wrote called Becoming Gaia, which is also somewhat tangentially related to philosophy of science. What's my favourite religious order? The Carmelites, absolutely. Carmelites, yeah. Discalced Carmelites. St. John of the Cross and Edith Stein, of course. Favourite... Great question. Favourite Protestant denomination? I would say like that sort of old Anglican which Tolkien was part of. I think there was a lot there actually, and I think I can, so I'd have some sympathies with that. Not that I've turned into like, I have problems with all Protestantism or anything like this. Not at all. But yeah, that. Someone said, I haven't heard of Charles Taylor, giant Catholic philosopher from Canada. No, unfortunately, I haven't. I've heard the name, but favourite 20th century Thomist? I'm slowly getting into Garrigou Lagrange. I've got his 4 things, heaven, hell, death and suffering to read. And I also really want to read his 3... What's it called? Let me find it. 3 Ages of the Interior Life. So him so far. But F.J. Sheed's Theology for Beginners was a really great introduction. That's probably the best introduction. What my experience with evil when you're interested in occultism? Once again, it's like secretum meum mihi, right? Secret belongs to me. I can't exactly explain it. It's not something I can say, oh, one day I did this thing and then bang, like there was a demon in the corner. That's not how evil is, unfortunately. One would hope that evil was like that, because if there was a demon in a corner, you'd avoid him, right? Well, you'd hope that people would. That's not how evil is, unfortunately. Evil's a nefarious form or mimicry of spirit, which tries to do the same thing, I would say. So it says, do I believe in the devil as an actual fallen angel? Yes, there you go. Yeah, I do. And the reason for my sort of belief in that sort of thing is looking around the world. Someone's just said the works of Francis Yates, ? I tried to read that. That was a very dense book, actually. The Hermetic Tradition book by Francis Yates. Very tough. Very tough. What led me away from Protestantism led me away from Catholicism. Okay. Well, I'm not in the. This is the thing with these things. I'm not in the realm of trying to preach in the sense of converting others, because I'm not there theologically speaking, and what one finds for them. I'm not here to disregard God's will, really. Someone says after Lagrange you should check out Etienne Gilson and Jacques Maritain. Yeah, Maritain and Gilson are definitely. I read when I did the episode on converts to the real. They came up a lot in that book, and it's a really great book of Catholic history in terms of that philosophical tradition as well. Someone says, I really enjoy and respect the diversity of guests and philosophical views you investigate with the podcast. So I was a little disappointed with the Discord community. Any plans for more moderation? The Discord community has been running a long time, and Discord communities is very difficult to keep active. And I don't ever... My moderation in the Discord has always been very, very minimal, in the sense that I'm fine for people to say really what they want, as long as it's not racist, sexist, and they're not allowed to post any sexual content or anything like that. And there's also no like bullying. So if there's something there that people disagree with, because it might be like right wing or really left wing, then that's not really up for me to moderate, because who am I to say, oh, you don't get to say that. So yeah, and I mean the Discord community is very, it is what it is, but the push for free speech in certain directions, to say like, oh, you go in, I mean, if you go in somewhere and ultimately you think, oh, I'm not too comfortable in this place, if there's usually I always say to people, if there's something that's been said in the Discord and you have a problem with it, and it's genuinely like hurtful or an attack, then message me and I'll ban that person. I've banned many people, but ultimately, if it's just because you disagree with the politics, then I'm not going to just say to people, all right, we can't talk about this anymore. So that's my answer on that. And I just not one for really moderating that type of thing. People have got their own views. Someone says, thoughts on perennialism. I just still haven't read enough into it. I mean, I've read Getting On, and I've only really read one Getting On, which was the Crisis of the Modern World, and I just have, once again, it's one of those things. I think someone asked this last time, and I just have yet to read enough for me to make a proper comment. Someone says, have you ever done an episode? I'm guessing you mean on, not and. Have you ever done an episode on Swedish artist Ivana Gueli? And when I finished my chat with Abdul Hakim Murad, he actually said to me, someone I should think about doing an episode on is Ivana Gueli. And then he said, I'll try find you someone, and he couldn't find anyone, so I've sort of been looking since. But it's tough to find people. Someone says, have I studied a lot of history? I could tell you all about the history of the Fourth Way between the years of about 1890 and 1959 in immense detail. But I've read, I enjoy reading about history, but just don't get too much time for it. And like a typical sort of young Western man, like World War II interests me and World War One interests me. And I've been reading like a history of England as a way to sort of brush up on perhaps and I'm interested in church history as well. I've got this, I think it's called The Birth of Christendom by, is it someone Farrell, I think. Come along. So other questions which aren't in the chat. Someone, do I read French? I don't read French. Have I studied Olivier Ray? No. Someone asked in the other questions, what's my favourite monkey? I don't have one. Sorry to say. What is my current view of the natural sciences? Physics, chemistry, and biology. One thing that's a real weak spot for me in a way, other than geography, which anyone in here will tell you I'm dreadful at geography. Like there is children with better geography than me. I just can't do it. Never been able to. I don't know why. What is my current view of the natural sciences? It's another weak spot that I don't do this thing that a lot of philosophers used to do, back in the day, which is keep up with trends in the natural sciences. So sometimes when I mention things like the Big Bang or things like this, I think actually this is probably outdated now. I mean, science is moving quite fast. I would say that a book that overhauled my understanding of the natural sciences was Gurdjieff's Theory of Hydrogens by Robin Bloor, which really made me realise how ahead of the curve Gurdjieff was in terms of these things. And there's plenty of things which in his day people were saying Gurdjieff was an being. Right, I'll move back to the other questions. Someone says, do you cook? What do you eat? Yeah, I cook, and I don't understand this. That, to me, no offense to this person, I'm sure it's an innocent question, but the question of do you cook is an absolute absurdity to me. The idea that there's people who grown adults, at least, I'm not saying that children should have to cook their own meals or whatever, but the idea that there's grown adults over the age of 16 who literally don't have the ability to cook a basic meal, and genuinely I think there are many people who rely on going out and eating out. I mean, that's madness to me. So what I really eat, to be honest, very basic. And what I do at the start of the week, I get a whole chicken, I roast it, and then I put that into meal prep tubs when it does about 5 or 6 meals, and I have chicken with beans and rice, like black-eyed beans with rice, and then a little salad. I have that for dinner every day, and I don't really eat too much at the moment. I recently came across this fantastic passage about the theory of digestive juices from Gurdjieff, and it's actually given me a ton more energy. And it's a theory which not a theory, I mean it cured. So the story goes that this young Polish man was being trained to be an athlete. So his father wanted him to be an athlete because he was of good genetics or whatever back in the day, and so his father made him eat 20 eggs every morning and eat tons and tons of food. And this young chap eventually his face was covered in spots. He was getting ill. He was actually losing weight and getting thinner, and he was just exhausted. And so this man meets Uspensky, the boy's father meets Uspensky, and Uspensky doesn't know what to do, so he says, I'll have to talk to Gurdjieff. And Gurdjieff says, right, you have to come stay with me. You have to come stay with me. And the father wasn't allowed anything to do with it for a couple of months. And Gurdjieff Gurdjieff says on the first night to the boy, he says, you like fried eggs? He says, yeah. And he says, there'll be some in the morning. And he's used to 20 fried eggs a day. So the boy comes down in the morning, and before breakfast, it's 7 a.m. He says, breakfast. And he goes, actually, before breakfast, we've got to do this, and this. And when he's finished all these things, Gurdjieff just keeps pushing him to the point where this boy's by 9 o'clock, this boy has already basically had a full day. Or, Gurdjieff's right, move those rugs. Once you've done that, put up the paintings, blah, blah, blah. And he's exhausted, and he sits down, and finally he's given one fried egg and a tiny sort of morsel of bread for his breakfast. And the days goes on, and eventually this is all this boy is really eating is that for breakfast, and then a small soup with bread, and then occasionally might have something else or whatever. And eventually the boy, his face clears up, he's full of energy, he doesn't need much sleep, he's great. And he says, what was happening? And Gurdjieff says to him that what was happening is the body, for instance, only produces, let's say, 10 amount of gastric juices. If you are ingesting 10 things, or let's say 10 amount of food, these are obviously just ways to think about it, then the relationship of gastric juices is 1-to-1, and that's enough then for the body to actually ingest the nutrients. But if you're eating way, way, way more, 20 food to 10, then it's 1-to-2, and more and more and more. And eventually the gastric juices are only just doing enough to break it down so it can actually move through. They're not actually breaking it down so the nutrients can actually go into your bloodstream. This is Gurdjieff's theory. And eventually, this boy goes home, and he's all well again. And I've really been try to work off that basis of actually eating very small meals and fasting a fair amount. So yeah, do I cook, do I eat? Yeah, I only really eat between about 2 and 8 p.m. and I eat very, very basic stuff. So maybe one day I'll join a monastery and they'll say, blimey, you eat more minimally than us. But who knows? I very much doubt that. Blimey, got loads of questions. Did I ever get hold of Bob Dobbs medicine? If so, did it work? I haven't done that yet. What I did instead, I did get some like high potency magnesium, but Bob was like, no, not that stuff. That's rubbish. But magnesium, I just never found it did much to me. A lot of people go on about it. So apparently the thing with magnesium is that the micronutrients of magnesium. So a lot of people say that you should get enough magnesium from vegetables, but a lot of the data regarding the nutrient quality of vegetables hasn't been updated with regard to the micronutrients which is in the soil. So actually, even though originally if a carrot is grown organically and properly, yes, it would have X amount of magnesium in it. But because we've riddled and ruined the soil with everything, there isn't that in it anymore. So, and no, I didn't get hold of Bob's medicine. So sorry about that. What is the best diet for an occultist? I mean, one, I don't really support occultism, but the theories on this, just to mention it, are split. Someone like John Michael Greer would say that actually a lot of people shouldn't eat vegetarian diets on if they're practicing that kind of thing, because you start to get very woozy and wayward. And he would always say to people that if they started to feel weird, what they need is to anchor themselves, and to do that with a double bacon cheeseburger with fries, right? This really hearty thing. And a lot of people, Gurdjieff, another Gurdjieffian theory, I mean, I'll just keep mentioning them, is that, for instance, Gurdjieff would say that, in terms, it's really related to this actually, that if everything is on this scale of hydrogens and everything has a certain level of being, then this is where the famous quote comes from Gurdjieff. Infamous, not that well known, I should say. But he says that a baked potato is more intelligent than a raw potato. And what he's saying is that as it's been baked, the digestive properties of it and the nutrients is more sort of amiable and easier to assimilate into our actual bloodstream as before. And for this is why the reason Gurdjieff says that, well, actually for a lot of people, a vegetarian diet isn't very good, because you're taking all your nutrients from things which are very low down on the scale of being. A carrot is under so many more laws than a lamb. So if you eat meat, you're ingesting something which is far more developed, and so you're literally ingesting into your bloodstream something which is far higher on the scale of being. So yeah, but don't practice occultism. There you go. Do I still eat tuna straight from the can? Yeah, I do, actually. If I want a quick snack, I'll have a tuna from the tin. And usually I'll sprinkle a bit of salt on top. I still really enjoy it. I think it's delicious. Sometimes I might have that with like cucumber or something. How healthy have you been eating recently? I was ill the last 3 weeks, which is why I had to change. This was meant to be a Christmas stream, but I was ill, but fairly healthy now. I do eat small meals and meat, veg, and a brilliant salad from a recipe of Gurdjieff's, which I found, which is fantastic. It's the nicest, most delicious salad I've ever tasted. So he sort of called it salad, but he also called the salad to cost the earth, because everything goes into it. I might give you the recipe if you're interested, but it's fantastic. So the same question twice, once in the chat and once on the, I think probably by the same person. They really want to know, why am I bald? Genetics. I could say something cool like I shaved my head so that the rays of light from the Lord are easier to get in, but no, it's just poor genetics. I was balding. I'm happy. It's been to my benefit in a way, for certain amounts of pride, I think, in that I dealt with something that a lot of men deal with at not a great time. So, for instance, I was balding and receding to the point where I had to shave it off at 19, right? And I was balding really from 17 onwards. And at that age, it's far stranger. You just have to deal with it as if you, I don't know, just deal with this thing that life's given you. You think, oh, well, whatever. But a lot of men, of course, would have to deal with this in the age where they've settled, they're secure in themselves, right? They've got to maybe their mid-30s, they're financially stable, they've, everything's sorted, and then all of a sudden they're dealt this sort of blow with how they look. So I've been used to that. The question's there again. Thanks, guys. Have I read Julius of Evola? Yeah. I did an episode on Evola with DC Miller a long time ago, which is available if you go to the Discord. I've read Evola. I think Evola is not a very good writer. I think he's a bit of a plagiarist. I did enjoy Men Amongst the Ruins. I did enjoy, I forgot the name of it, the biographical one that he wrote, which was given to me as the one to read. And I preferred his more, polemical ones as opposed. I don't particularly like him when he starts tackling, for instance, Revolt Against the Modern World, other than being a fantastic title, is this dense treatise on esotericism. I just didn't enjoy it, and I don't remember much from it. I just remember it being, a lot. But yeah, I don't mind him. Would you consider doing more episodes on? But then I don't read Evola anymore. I would say I haven't read him in a long time, and maybe I need to spend more time with him. But he's this sort of rightist fascination that people talk about right, and they go read Evola, and I would say no, read Joseph de Maistre, right? Read St. Petersburg Dialogues by de Maistre, Would you consider doing more episodes on Cormac McCarthy's work? I'd love to do more episodes on Cormac McCarthy's work. He's the one. There's not many fiction writers that can really hold my attention anymore, but McCarthy is just, undoubtedly a master of it. I'd like to do one just on Southern Gothic in McCarthy's work, really. But it's, once again, tough to find scholars. I did email that other Blood Meridian scholar, but he never got back to me. Someone actually said earlier, I think I missed it, it's Thomas. Have I read Thomas Merton? Yeah, I've read Thomas Merton. I was saying about this earlier. I've read the first Notebooks volume, and I've read Seven Story Mountain. And Thomas Merton is so nice to read. He's a delight to read, Thomas Merton. He's the Catholic who led me to the faith and realised it could be something more than that didactic, finger-wagging Catholicism that I'd been taught by every single media representation of Catholicism. Catholicism is extremely open and mystical and beautiful, and Merton really gets that in writing. Thoughts? Hang on. Oh, there we go. Do I lift? I don't lift anymore. I got to my lifts at one point, and this is when I stopped. So I weighed 75, 78 kilos. I could do a 110 bench, I could do a 120 squat, and I could do a 160 deadlift. And it got to the point where the effort in to effort out, like the effort in to the lift gains out, was just not worth my time, and also not worth the eating, because you just have to eat and eat and eat. And I didn't really like that aspect of it. So then I moved to a very basic lift, and now I just sort of do basic resistance training with like some body weight exercises thrown in 3 or 4 times a week. Obviously not recently because I've been ill. Just curious, have you ever had any guests on that you really strongly disagreed with throughout the interview? I've had a lot of guests on that I disagreed with. People seem to think that because I have someone on or because I'm reading something, I agree with it, which is really, really dumb. I'm not saying you're dumb, but I really, really dislike that, because I think that attitude has disallowed the academy to really open itself to a lot of views. For instance, just because someone teaches a course, for instance, on Spengler, or someone teaches a course on, let's say, de Maistre, or Evola, as we were saying, it shouldn't mean that they agree with them. You can be really, really interested in someone's work without agreeing with every single facet of it, and also you can be interested with it without agreeing with it at all. For instance, I just had John Zerzan on. I really like John Zerzan. He's a great guy. Primitivism and anarcho-primitivism genuinely just interests me. Am I a primitivist? No. I'm sat here in a very comfortable flat, and I acknowledge that I probably wouldn't want to go back to that, and I'm more on the sort of Greerian middle ground, where actually no, I think there is a certain amount of technology which is very good. I'm really, really thankful that when I go to the dentist, I can get to have a very well quantified injection in my gum, which is basically painless. as opposed to just huffing on some ether and you might just die because someone's not been able to measure it, you know. So yeah, there's a lot of the guests that I've had on I disagree with, but I've never had anyone on to I've disagreed with to the point of saying like, you know, right, I can't. And ultimately, I think if that happened, I would say no. You know, I think I remember with no, there hasn't really been anyone who. But I don't agree with them. Sometimes it's like I'm just interested in this idea. I don't follow it through in my daily life with, you know, a passion. Thoughts on Jesus? The greatest guy. My favourite Jesus moment. I mean, you know, I don't really know how to answer that question because once again, that's all encompassing. But my favourite moment of Jesus is the forgiveness of Peter in the temple. You know, his best friend, his closest. I might have mixed this up. But anyway, just the forgiveness. I think I have mixed that up, which is really bad. I was trying to figure out if it was Peter or Paul. That's awful. Because it's the key Catholic. And this is live. It's the key Catholic section. It's in Matthew. To you I give the keys. I hope someone can tell me who that is, and then I'll continue with what I was saying. Anyway, would I ever have Alex Jones on? No. Just because the crossover's not big enough, and I don't, you know, Alex is fun or whatever, but it's not the attention that I want. Someone said their favourite catchphrase is right. Well, that seems like a good place to wrap this up. Yeah, I'd probably need to come up with something new. Cyber's come in for me there. I thought it's St. Peter. So with Jesus, the best moment, my favourite moment is, and it's the moment of pure forgiveness in the Bible, is Peter in the temple denying Jesus 3 times, and Jesus knows that his closest friend, his closest ally, the apostle who is given his keys, you know, the entire legacy, he knows before it even happens that this man is going to deny him. He knows that when he gives him the keys, he knows the whole thing, and yet he still denies him. He still forgives him, and he still hands over the keys of the kingdom to him in an act of pure forgiveness. And that is possibly my favourite passage of the Gospels in a way, because it's just fantastic. Someone said this is Christmas streaming. It's Christmas Eve here in the Julian calendar. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Orthodox people coming in. People are talking about different meals now. Someone said, do I follow a particular religion? Yeah, I follow Catholicism, becoming a Catholic. Favourite political theorist? If you were to include Jung, it'd be Ernst Jung. James Burnham is great. James Burnham is fantastic. I learnt a lot from, on Moldbug's recommendation, of course, but The Machiavellians by James Burnham. Fantastic. Yeah. Have I read Pinheads and Patriots by Bill O'Reilly? I haven't. If you had a small pile of books, like a backpack full, you could preserve during and after a collapse, what would you take? So right at the bottom of that backpack would be Travis J.I. Corcoran's homesteading books, those 2 huge volumes, which I've yet to get my hands on, but 2 things which could basically, as I understand it, you could start a homestead and you could homestead from those 2 books alone. So you're going to want them. There'd be a Bible in there. I would also put Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson by Gurdjieff, which is my other big long read. And then maybe a few works of mysticism. I'd want things that I could dip into. I mean, maybe if I was to put a fiction book in there, I'd want something like Blood Meridian. Something that's so utterly beautiful that you could just go into it again and again and again. Someone said my episode with Joseph Azizi led them to revisit Christianity. And they said, thank you. Well, thanks very much. Makes me very happy. That was the donation, that question as well. Thanks for the donation. Yeah, all right, I'll answer that a bit more in depth then. As for the book, so yeah, I mean, practical things aside, I mean, it's the question of desert island books. Maybe I'll limit myself to 5, for instance. So if we say the Bible, Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson by Gurdjieff, because it's just absolutely, it's a lifetime's work to attend to that. Maybe like a huge reference work of the history of philosophy, but that's a bit useless. I'd want really maybe the Red Book by Jung. Things like that I could just pick at and read a sentence and think about just for life, you know. Yeah. What do you think about interviewing Peter Kingsley? I emailed Peter Kingsley regarding Catafalque, and he's not doing interviews at the moment, unfortunately. But they said they'd get back in touch when he is, or if he does. Opinion on Goethe. Someone actually asked me to do an episode on Goethe, and I've read forgot the name of it. Story of Young Werther, however it's pronounced. Didn't think much of it, unfortunately. But a lot of people said that he changes a lot. I don't know much about Goethe outside of that. Have I read Alistair McIntyre's book on Edith Stein? No, it's on my to-read list, and I'll get round to it. I've got after Virtue, you know, the famous Alistair McIntyre to get through first. What do I think of Sean Hannity's recent book, Live Free or Die: America in the Brink? I haven't read it, unfortunately. Cool. Right, that's the questions in the chat for now. What is the reason I made the Hermetics question a staple of the podcast? Yeah, big news on this, actually. Big news. So the reason the Hermetics question originally was when I was not super confident or skilled as an interviewer as I have become from doing hundreds and hundreds of interviews, was a way to open up the conversation to basically make to allow you to see who the guest's interested in and see who they're, you know, who's tugging their strings and who they're super interested in, and also just open it up. But as time's gone on, I've realised that sometimes that question's like, they'll just say three thinkers, and then it's like, okay, that was almost pointless. Sometimes it's like three thinkers and we're 15 minutes in and we haven't got to the reason you clicked. So it's a decision I'm still umming and ahhing about, but the chances are in the coming interviews after the next month, because the recent ones I've recorded still have it, I probably am going to remove the Hermetics question, because I think now that I'm more comfortable in just going straight into it, it's no longer really needed, unfortunately. And someone said, is the construction of rooms and dialogues between thinkers a part of your own philosophical method? I mean, it's something I always think about, and I've said this before, that actually the way I organise my bookshelf is that one way I sort of thematically do it, so I have continentals and then maybe like Junger and conservative revolution and stuff like that. I do it like that, but I also make sure I never put authors next to each other who I know wouldn't get on, because I feel it's a real travesty for their legacy for me to put them next to someone they hated. And I always think that it is an interesting idea, this idea of thinkers meeting people, but there you go. Have I ever considered inviting two guests with opposing views and have them debate each other on the show, me being the facilitator? I've thought about this, and it very quickly I just thought, no, I really don't want to do this. I think the format of debate has basically been ruined and has had its day. As far as I can see from a lot of online stuff, most debates end in ad hominem and they end up in arguments and not debates, because the problem is it's getting two people who are mature enough to enter into a debate with that openness beforehand to say, like, well, maybe this person will actually change my mind. But in my lifetime, which, you know, so far is quite short, I've yet to see many people who have been won over by a debate. So if that's the purpose of it, no. If I was to invite two people on just to have a discussion, sure. It's very difficult. It's quite a difficult thing to chat with three of you in a way with one facilitating. It's sometimes quite tough. How many books do I have total? About in March of this year, I sold, and I know the weight because I had to weigh them to sell to this company. Because so what you can see, I'll stretch this just for this. what you can see here, and that last shelf is the last shelf. What you can see, I had this and another half of it in March of last year, and I sold about 220 kilos of books because it was stupid. It was stupid. Like my room quite literally there was nowhere any longer practical to put them. They were just stacks and stacks on the floor. And this is one of the reasons I really, really wanted this apartment, is because of those books and the fact it's near the sea. Because of the bookshelves. How many do I have? I don't actually know. One day maybe maybe I'll really minimalize down. The thing is, I mean, not long ago, I think it was about a year or two ago, I minimalized down to maybe like 2 of these shelves. And the thing is, I mean, if you think in a year for Hermitix, I produce at least 120 things, 120, I'd say, roughly. No, maybe a bit less, about 100. But I mean, that's, let's say, 70 books already, which is is a shelf. So that's quite quick. And then there's my own reading, and I do love to read. That's my main hobby, is reading. So but I have a lot basically, and I also have down there a whole smaller shelf, all just for Gurdjieff stuff, because I've got so many Gurdjieff books, and there's a stack of Gurdjieff books next to it, which because I just have so much on him. Would I ever consider having Michael Lowry on your show to talk about Kabbalah and anarchism? Someone links me his stuff, then I'm always up for seeing whether or not a guest would be a good fit. I'm always open to that. Yeah. What lesson has life taught you the most? What lesson has life taught me the most? The best lesson I've ever been taught, before I get to life lessons, the best lesson I was ever taught was by my I've been lucky in the sense that I don't really believe most modern British education, at least, is very good at all. It's reliant on tutors and teachers, and that's more happenstance. And my luck in life has really come from falling in with great tutors, just happened to. And my art tutor in college, I mean, I only studied art in college, but my art tutor in college, one of the first things he used to say was, "Don't tell me what you're going to do, show me what you've done," which is a real hard lesson for this, current generations, to say, "Don't tell me what you're going to do, show me what we've done." Everyone's got these, it's akin to the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? You either do it or you don't, basically. And I think, trying to think of his name, the famous scientist that everyone, Richard Feynman, says something along the same lines. He says there is no could, there's only can, right? So yeah. As for life itself, the one, I mean, really, this comes from Gurdjieff, but I mean, it's just that no amount of self-indulgence and negative emotions changes a thing. It just makes things worse. And basically the hardest lesson to learn is that a good 95 to 99 in most points in life, 100% of people's misery is misery they've brought about by their own development or creation of what that misery is. People bring about their own misery, and it's very difficult to unlearn that. So yeah. The next question is, why did you choose Edith Stein to be your patron saint? Once again, as Edith says, secretum mea mihi, which is, this secret belongs to me. The thing with picking your confirmation saints, it seems, as I've been looking into it and looking into people's experiences with it, is that it's very personal, in the sense that saints almost just come to you. Of course, there's practical reasons for Stein, for myself. Her being, as I understand it, maybe the only saint in the continental tradition, in continental philosophy. In my own background in continental philosophy, I just felt some connection there. But Edith Stein's memory, and I've got that the talk on the life of Edith Stein coming out on this Sunday at 5 p.m. But the memory of Edith Stein is really the memory of a light in the darkness, but it's a light, I would say, which really did understand that it wasn't going to win. And quite pessimistically, I guess, but optimistic in the same sentence, is that idea of attempting to do some good, even though you know you're not going to beat anyone, you're not going to win, is really how I feel a lot of movements, traditional movements, religious movements, feel in this era at the moment, that against the behemoth of, globalist consumer capitalism, that really the fight's already lost, but the thing is just to battle it anyway. So that's really why Stein, and I love Stein's writing, and her biography spoke to me, a lot. There's a lot in there. I mean, it's a very simple biography, but yeah. The next question is the abiotic petroleum origin theory at all persuasive in your opinion? Is this the one where it sort of, the petroleum rebuilds or whatever, and it isn't actually to do with fossil fuels or anything? I don't know it all too well. If that theory, whether or not it's persuasive doesn't matter. We'll see. If that theory is true, then surely then the petroleum, I don't know, will just be there. But as far as I'm concerned, and we're not seeing that. So, yeah. Someone actually asked the most important question that's been asked so far. So sorry to everyone else who's asked a question, but this is by far the most important. Why do I think snooker is not more popular outside of the British Isles? Well, the thing is, snooker is it's a game for patient, charismatic, and just top tier gentlemen. It's not for the rabble. It's not for the mass, not for the herd, as Heidegger would say. And I actually mean this quite sincerely. I was being a little bit dramatic there, but why is snooker not more popular outside of the British Isles? Really, you could dumb that down to a question to why is snooker not more popular? And it's because as a game, snooker can't be sped up. It can't be changed. It has to be silent. It has to be like no music, no funfair, and it's an extremely, ultimately for most people, an extremely boring, slow and quiet game, and it's in that sense it's a relic of taste. It's like super traditional. People are still wearing like waistcoats and suit trousers while they go around the table, and everyone's very cordial, and there's all this decorum, and it's somehow no one's noticed that this relic of the past has somehow snuck into the modern world, and that's why I love it, and I do. But then it's also why I love Alex Higgins, because he was the hurricane that came in and sort of disrupted that. Right, so that actually is all the questions. So I'll open up the floor in the chat for any more questions people might have while I'm still live. Yeah. I can't sit here and just answer snooker questions. I'd love to just commentate snooker. But do I think Chinese players will dominate in the next 10 years? Yes, absolutely. We saw it the other day in the championship just before Christmas, with that young player coming through and absolutely wiping the floor with it, and I love to see that. But there's also the great Portuguese wildcard, which was fantastic as well. So yeah. Someone said, have you noticed how John Michael Greer will almost inevitably somehow reference the fact that he doesn't have a TV when you have him on? I have noticed this, and it's quite an antiquated, it's an antiquated dropout reference that I quite like, because I don't know how many people really watch TV in that sense anymore, really, because I think we need to start saying, that was the 70s, 80s and 90s version of that. Oh my God, you're not one of the normal people, right? To say, I don't have a TV in the 70s, 80s or 90s was scary. And I think we need to change that. Obviously, people have a TV, they have the physical apparatus of a television, but we might need to say something like, I don't have a streaming service, right? But I mean, it's interesting the other day when I was declaring that I didn't need the TV license because I don't have a TV, by the way. I was declaring that there isn't an option to say that so there was 4 or 5 reasons why you don't need a TV license, and not a single one of them was I don't watch TV. One was like I don't have the equipment, which has made me laugh, as if there's someone out there who's sort of laying in an empty apartment really yearning to consume some television. But the rest were like I watch TV online, or I just watch YouTube. There was no like I don't do this, which was absurd. Favorite gospel, Matthew. Do I have children? No. I'd love children one day, but I have a sense that that's not what's in store for me. Same with a wife, to be honest. Yeah. Entering Catholicism has changed that whole discussion in a way. Have I ever boxed or watched boxing? No, I mean, I wish boxing was on more, but I've never. I did karate for a while and got to my 2nd belt in karate, Shotokan karate, and then I went to one lesson of Krav Maga self-defense, and a huge guy partnered up with me and punched me in the face while I was wearing this mask thing. So I never went back. It's not for me, and I'm happy to admit that I'm not some bruiser despite the appearance. Will the Spengler guy come back to talk about Volume 2? Yeah, he is. He said he's more than up for Volume 2. I just have to read it, and I didn't want to. I basically read Volume 1. And I was like, I'm going to put some time between now and Volume 2. What's holding me back from becoming a monk? This is the main. I will be honest. This is the main thing holding me back from becoming a monk. No, not that I haven't got the calling, and I'm not even I'm not even baptized yet, so it's ridiculous. But if you mean what might in the future hold me back from becoming, entering such a vocation, I feel. I mean, at the moment, Hermitix gets roughly 100,000 to 120,000 downloads a month, which is really big for a philosophy podcast. Not tooting my own horn, my own horn. And it's a platform which has really done exactly what I wanted to do, which is the amount of emails and messages I've had to say, I would have never known about this thinker had it not been for your podcast. So it's doing what I wanted it to do. I get to work the job I love and talk to people who are writing really interesting books all day. And so that's not something I ever really want to give up in a way. And I mean, if that was in some sense compatible, if I could be like the podcast priest or something, then maybe. But that's a calling, isn't it? And as I understand it as well, my age, 27, it's quite late to be getting into these things. Some of them at least. Yeah, so there you go. Favorite composers? I couldn't tell you. I'm not big on classical music, unfortunately. How many books in my possession at this moment? I don't know. What's the average per shelf? It's about 20. I don't know. I don't know. Let me count a shelf here, and then that's about 20 per shelf. 500, something like that, maybe more. 500, and about 100 of them are Gurdjieff. Is Catholicism compatible with esotericism or occultism? I don't want to answer that question because I sort of answered it earlier, and I don't know enough to give you the problem is, right? The problem with that question is Catholicism compatible with esotericism or occultism? Right, what you're asking is Catholicism compatible with hidden mystical teachings in general, right? Not all occultism is bad. There is such a thing as Christian occultism, actually, but I'm about that. So it's just a difficult question because you have to be really specific. If you said, is Catholicism compatible with the work of Crowley? No, for instance. Would you ever do an episode on the work of Peter Sloterdijk? I think that's pronounced like that. I really want to read You Have to Change Yourself by him. It's been on my list for a long time. I'll happily do an episode on his work, but I have yet to read any of it. Do I like Owen Cyclops comics? Absolutely adore Owen Cyclops comics. And in a certain way, they've watching his journey, because he was originally into this the same sort of mystical things as myself. Watching his journey was very much an inspiration for myself. Alongside a guy called Akira, who runs Love Crypt records, many of them. Have you talked to Peter Strostedt Hughes? Yeah, I spoke to him yesterday morning, actually. No joke. And that will be up on the 29th. So, and it's about nihilism, so there you go. Do enjoy the Discord a lot. Yeah, I love the Discord. I mean, a lot of those guys really I consider friends because, you know, it's yeah, I hang out in there a lot. I enjoy it. Strange that you studied art but never really talk about it. Any favourite artistic movement period? I really like, I mean, he's not a movement or a period. My favourite artist is an artist called Ad Reinhardt, who painted black square paintings. And the way he mixed his pigments or his paints, he would get a whole tube of black oil paint, an entire tube, and squirt it into a bottle. And then he'd get literally a thimble or a finger smear of like blue and mix it in with the black and then cover that in turpentine. So he had like a little vat of this and he'd shake it up and leave it for a month. And he'd do this with 9 colours. And then he'd paint the whole canvas black. And then in 9 squares, he would do each one with a separate black. And this meant that these, if you look up these paintings, they've had to change the photos with saturation so you can actually see it. But these paintings are impossible to photograph because the colours are so indiscernible that only the human eye can pick them up, and it can only pick them up once you've stood in front of the painting for about 10-15 minutes, and then they come through. And I just remember thinking, that's astounding. There you go. Have I read Rudolf Steiner? I read his book on Lemuria and Atlantis a long time ago, and I recently read his biography because I should be doing a talk on Steiner and Weber in relation to disenchantment at some point with a guy called Aaron French. Yeah. Someone said they can see House of Leaves in the background. House of Leaves, I adore House of Leaves. I you know, it was one of those hyped books that people, along with I mean, I like all the cliche books which annoying pretentious people like, right? I'm fine with that. I like Infinite Jest. I like House of Leaves. I'm fine to say, you know what, I enjoyed it. I really don't care. I thought House of Leaves was so good, and I thought it was a really, really great horror book. Did I really mean that tweet about liking the Hobbit movies? If you remove the romance, right? Remove the romance. Yeah, I'm on board with everyone else that the romance in the Hobbit movies was silly. The Hobbit, the book, is a children's book. It's fun. If you go back and read it, Lord of the Rings is also full of songs, right? But the Hobbit is full of songs which are just joyous and silly, and the book has a silliness to it which isn't in Lord of the Rings. And I think actually that the Hobbit films portrayed it in the right light. They were just very, very fun and a really great entry in a way. What I think of John David Ebert, I've heard of him so many times, I don't know much about him at all, unfortunately. Favourite Tarkovsky film? The Stalker, but I'm a big fan of Tarkovsky, yeah. Since I like Owen, you should reach out to him and have him on the podcast. Yeah, it would break my rule. I'd love to speak to him. Maybe I'll do it as a live stream or something. I'd love to speak to him, but I have just this faint rule that even if people just use an anonymous, maybe Owen Cyclops is enough, but it's a bit too far one way for me. If it was real name, it's fine. Pseudonyms, fake names are fine, but they have to be like realistic in a way. But he has got a new book out, and it'd be nice to talk to him in a way because we've both. It seems we've both done the same journey. So maybe I'll do a live stream with him at some point. And people are talking about the Hobbit movies. I think there's just this. And any more questions, please let me know. I'll probably go for another maybe at most 30 minutes. So please say. I will comment on this though, that this whole thing of I hate the Hobbit movies, and you get this sort of virulent social pressure to just dunk on them, and it almost becomes like a cathartic act to say, you know what, actually I like them. Like I did, they're enjoyable films. Same with the Resident Evil films, as I said. Like I do sort of like quite cliche cinema in a way. Oh, sorry, yeah, someone did ask that. Besides enjoying snooker, do you also enjoy chess or any other brain sport. No, I couldn't. I can't. Snooker and chess are different as far as I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Thinking ahead and stuff like that. But I'm not good at that form of logic. Never could be. Brain sport. No, I mean on the side at the moment, I'm just making scale models. So my hobbies are watching snooker, making scale models, and reading dense philosophy books. So you could say that I'm basically mentally in my retirement at 27, but I enjoy my life. So there you go. I could read John David Ebert's Art After Metaphysics. Yeah, I could give it a read and give him an interview. I'll see. I'll look into it. This is what I say to everyone because there's often reasons or caveats that I can't do things and things like that. So I'll give it a look. Do I go on other podcasts? I've been on a few. I've been on maybe 5 or 6 now. I went on the Store recently, which was very enjoyable to discuss exiting modernity. Someone said Ernst Jung, a concept of the Anarch for these dystopian times, would be an awesome topic for the podcast, by the way. I've done a talk on the Anarch on Omishville with Russell Berman. That was in August 2020. So you can look that up. If you just type in to be honest, if you type in the Anarch on YouTube, there ain't going to be much on it. And I think, yeah, you should be able to find it. Have I heard of Eric Pritzvader? I've heard the name, but I haven't read anything of him. Do I work with the tarot? No, I don't. An old man at 27, yeah. I was an old man at 23. And thanks for the compliments on the Zerzan interview. He's pleasant to talk to, John, and I'm respectful of his stance that he hasn't moved. He he just said he's a Luddite. There you go. Someone said thoughts on BAP and his adjacent sphere of right-wing Twitter bodybuilders. There's aspects of it like with Solbra and the affirmations, which I'm not keen with, but anything which is really promoting like a healthy lifestyle of bodybuilding and eating, eggs and tropical fruits and things like that, I'm nothing against it. And there is a part of me also that's very sympathetic to that sort of Nietzschean vitalist taking up arms against the deadness of the soul of the modern world. I'm never gonna, and it's somewhat refreshing, yeah, in a way. How do you think we should prepare? All right, they're coming in. The question's coming in. How do you think we should prepare for collapse? I've answered this question many, many times, and I've always said that actually preparation for collapse, yeah, sure. Filling your cupboards full of goods and things is always going to be helpful, but really what the actual thing you need to do is be ready for change. Be ready to just be ready for the whole world to change and for you to not be able to suddenly use something and not allow that to just basically ground you and be like, oh, I don't know what to do, and go into some sort of weird coma or something like that, right? Can I do a podcast dedicated to René Guénon and the perennial philosophy? Yeah, potentially. I mean, it's once again, it's finding someone. It's very difficult. I've got some stuff coming up actually with Tom Cheetham for people who are interested in that sort of thing. Tom Cheetham on Henry Corbin, but it's going to be like maybe 3 parts because Corbin is extremely, fragmented. He's got so many things he touches on. Someone says still struggling with the cold. No, it's pretty much gone now. It's pretty much gone. But yeah. What do I think of the current our current Archbishop? I don't know enough to know. Do I ever go on lit / lit on 4chan? Not really. I know what you're on about, but no, not really. I don't. Most of my time is spent reading or working or doing the other stuff for Idea Market, the other podcast that I work for, and who are doing really great things. So shout out to those guys. But most of my time is spent working on their stuff or with them or doing the hermetic stuff. So I don't have time to browse 4chan, like back in the day. No. Someone said, considering my head shape, a longer full beard would suit me well. The camera, and I know this will sound like I'm just saying it, but the camera sort of turns my head into some sort of weird Play-Doh and skews it. I don't really look like that in real life. The lighting's terrible. That's not my vanity, by the way. Thoughts about vegetarianism or veganism? I think it can work. I think it genuinely. I'm not one of these people who it's like, oh, you have to eat. Carnivore worked well for me, and I still eat a high amount of meat. But I think the thing with vegetarianism and veganism is that you have to be really, really conscious, one, of what you're eating, as in, like the qualities of the food. You can't just go on to replacement foods, and you have to be a very conscious eater in terms of digest. You have to sit and digest it, because otherwise you're just not going to get the nutrients. These are lower developed things, vegetables. It hasn't got the same spiritual density as meat. That's a good question. Did I hesitate as coming out as Catholic? A little bit with some friends. I mean, not because I was worried they'd do anything, but because you have to be. One, I think the main thing is how to be sure of your decision. I don't want it to be like, oh, I'm becoming a Catholic, and then next week, it's some fad or something. So it took a long time. It was a few months before I'd started telling a few people. But I mean, I don't have many friends, so it didn't. It probably won't surprise you. I don't have many friends, so it didn't bother me that much. The thing, I made a conscious decision over Christmas. Actually, funnily enough, I made a conscious decision to not be preachy and not bring it up. And I found that actually many of my friends, I found that they messaged me on Christmas Day or New Year's to actually ask me about it. Like, oh, did you go to church today? And that was an interesting aspect of it in a way. Hang on. Someone says, you're one of my favourite podcasts for the past few months. What perks does joining the Discord have, and how much? Discord's free again. The Discord's open and free. I think I've left the perk thing up on Patron. There's a few so far. The perks really of joining, which is you could do it for $5 a month to get everything. There's a lot of exclusive blog posts. There's a fair amount at the moment of exclusive. So there's some talks on Girard, which are exclusive for patrons. There's some talks on blimey, I forgot. There's more exclusive talks for patrons. Ludwig Klager's as well. But I'm planning on much more patron-only stuff this year, just to ramp up patron support. The next one I should be recording next week will be on Ernst Jünger's On Pain, and that will be for patrons only. So yeah, but Discord's free. Do I live in the city or the country? I live in the country, and I will probably never in my life live in the city. I just can't do it. Someone said I'm condemned to death. Innocent. What would my last meal be? I don't know why this is a bigger question than the rest of them. Food's obviously too important. It would be a load of things. I remember once seeing a guy who I looked into the last meals of people, and he had like a bucket of fried chicken with chips and a Coke with ice cream, and he ate that whilst watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So I would include that aspect of it into mine, that I probably would watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy as a final farewell. And I would eat it would probably be maybe I don't know. Well, I'm not going to be I can't digest things all that well, so and I'm not going to be alive the next day, so I can finally eat what I want. It probably would be like a massively hot curry with a load of sides, like Indian sides, like sagaloo and aloo gobi with like peshwari naan and a huge lamb madras. It's usually my go-to. Yeah, I'll do that. Why do I think Pomo philosophy gets such a bad rep? Because people haven't, like most things that get bad rep, people just haven't spent the time reading it at all. It also, just to blame everything on postmodern philosophy, I think is it isn't exactly fair. I don't think the philosophers have gone out there to do that. It's a very difficult question, though. Yeah. Blimey. Favourite architectural period or school? There's a certain part of me that sort of likes Art Deco. I didn't used to. I hate Art Nouveau. I really dislike Art Nouveau. But Deco, there's something... I don't know, pleasantly malicious about it. I also like Gothic, of course, but I don't know much about architecture, pardon me. What do I think of Eloul, especially his theology? I'm meant to be reading at some point The Kingdom and the Presence of the Kingdom, but I haven't got around to it. Still don't know a ton about Eloul's theology, unfortunately. Someone asks, is Christianity experiencing a resurgence? I would say so, but primarily on the basis that all the alternatives that were tried, that the new atheists thought they were giving, really had as their foundations the whole time Christianity, just stripped of the divine. And now people are realizing that you really have two options there. Either you read the theology properly, which the new atheists didn't, and realize God's real, and you go that way towards revelation, or you enter into nihilism because you realize that actually the entire basis for the ethics and morals of the new atheists is reliant on something which apparently doesn't exist. Therefore, they're all relative and it doesn't matter. So you've got the split there, and that's why a lot of people are moving back, because we've had that push of complete relativism for years and years and years and years and years now, like since the 60s. We've had every sort of type of personal liberal revolution in terms of bodily autonomy, financial autonomy, gender autonomy, and we've all realized that all these material freedoms of the temporal world have simply brought us all to misery. And of course that many people are heading back towards Christianity. You know, you retreat to God, as Augustine says, are bringing us back there for this very reason, that the world's just on an ethical and moral free fall, and the only place of respite is God. So that's why. And yes, it is. Ignore this. Ignore this if we already addressed this. How compatible are occultism, Catholicism? I've addressed it about twice in this talk, so apologies. You might have to listen to it back through. Will I update the Meta Nomad blog sometimes this year? I have my new blog. I'll link, because the Meta Nomad blog. I moved from that because I've put it in the chat there. The Meta Nomad blog was a time, and the Venture with Reality one, which I'm now writing at the moment, is really accepting of the Gurdjieff and religious things, which completely changed me, which somewhat not incompatible, but which changed so drastically from the Meta Nomad blog that I thought to stop that and just keep that as it was. Someone said embrace full nihilism and stop deluding yourself. No, I won't, because ultimately, like, the choices between God and nihilism, and faith. Once again, faith isn't. I mean, this is a very serious thing, I guess. The choices between the choices I see it at the moment for a lot of people is between God and nihilism, because there's nothing on. There is no spectrum on the nihilist side. There can't be, because if there is a meaninglessness, then any value is entirely subjective, which basically enters everything into a complete relativism that can't be escaped, as far as I'm concerned. Now, well, someone's saying capitalize nihilism with a capital N. Well, no, all values are meaningless, so why should I bother to do that? And you're saying embrace nihilism. Well, why should I embrace it? Everything's meaningless, so why should I embrace it? Right? So it's just a continual problem. It's dumb. It's a midwit meme for idiots. I'm sort of sick, actually, like physically sick of nihilism and hearing about it. It has its conclusions, and if you want to enter into it, and I will say the thing that I always say about nihilists and nihilism. Why is it that even in a world where everything is meaningless, right? In a world where to for instance, let me get this right. If all values are meaningless and there is no meaning in the world, as nihilists state, then why is it that everyone who proclaims themselves a nihilist always heads towards hedonistic value? Right? Why is it they always head towards pleasure? Because in a truly nihilistic world, the difference between lifting weights and being healthy and eating like a pig and having sex with everyone you want there isn't a difference. There's no difference between everything, because everything is meaningless. And equally in such a world, why would you be sad when people die, when your pets die? Everything's meaningless. It's someone says there's no alternative. It's just utter stupidity, and I'm so sick. I'm so sick to death of nihilism, because it's had its day, and it's boring, and it can't answer for itself. That's the problem. If everything is meaningless, then nihilism simply can't answer for itself, because it inherently undermines itself. So you just enter into this, just do what you want. Well, if you want to do what you want, do what you want. But the reason you do certain things and the reason you feel certain things is because there has to be an underlying. Can't be bothered with such a dry and silly thing. And I personally, I remember back in the day when I was an atheist, Christopher Hitchens used to say that the duty of atheists, he used to say the burden of proof is on the religious to prove God. And I actually think the opposite is true. If you read Monsieur Eliot, History of Religious Ideas, from day one of literal recorded history, there has been belief in God, or a God, a form of God. Right? From day one. There hasn't been a belief in a stupid chemical reaction chain since day one. All right? God's belief and faith have been around since humans have been around. And of course they'll come with their arguments, but it's on them. Who cares? It's between God and nihilism. Someone said it's between God and nihilism, but I can't sincerely find a secretum mea mihi. My advice, seriously, is pray. Honestly, pray. It's not something there's no book you can read for that. Pray. Someone asks, what is worse, nihilism or irony poisoning, or are they the same underneath? Well, they're the same underneath, because irony is that, it might mean something else, but you enter into what's called I can't remember his name. But there's a great book on irony, The Rhetoric of Irony it's called. But there's a great book on, for instance, you have sincerity. And then you have a stable irony, where someone's saying one thing, but everyone understands that they mean something else. That's fine, as far as I'm concerned, in like comedy or whatever. But then you have unstable ironies, where it's like irony of irony of irony of irony, and everything enters into this just nihilism of language, and that I can't be bothered with. If someone says you can be ascetic, hedonistic, right-wing, left-wing, doesn't matter, it's pure freedom. Well, no, it's not pure freedom. It's meaningless, so freedom doesn't mean anything. There's no such thing as freedom if you're nihilist. There is no value such as freedom. So, there you go. What other podcasts do you listen to? I just don't get the time to, unfortunately. Yeah. Right. We're at 2 hours. We're just over. Last question then. Thoughts on Ratzinger's Jesus books? I've got the Introduction to Christianity to read by Ratzinger, but I haven't got there at the moment. Anyway, I need to go make my dinner. Thank you everyone for joining. I feel I've covered a lot. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for all the support. Ever since we began. 10k subscribers, thanks very much. And yeah, if you fancy supporting, then there's links in descriptions for Patreon.